Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good of you to have made time this afternoon to talk with me about this issue of certification and the extent to which we can encourage more people to engage with certificated product, particularly around giving it more meaning than perhaps it has. But I'm prejudging what your conclusions will be. We're going to introduce each person as we come to them. I'm going to talk with Kelly first, and then with Leanne back from Africa, and then with Olivia, and finally with Andrea, and then we'll go around again. But Kelly, can we start with you? You've been a member of the GSTC from the beginning. You're vice chair, I think, or deputy chair of GSTC. What was the ambition when it was set up?
Well, good afternoon, Harold. It's a pleasure to be here. Back in 2000, there was a meeting of certification bodies, well-known certification bodies at Mohonk Mountain House in New York State, to really discuss what was happening on the flourishing of certification bodies all over the world and the range of impact that they were having really on what they were requiring their certification entities to do. And so there was some concern around the idea of greenwashing and that confusion in the marketplace, that there wasn't anything hard and fast that people could look at to really determine whether an entity was certified and really doing some good things on the ground or just used as a marketing ploy. So that initiated several actions throughout the world, really, at several conferences to try and understand what might be needed to rectify that problem. And eventually, the Sustainable Tourism Stewardship Council was formed to really look at how can we accredit certification bodies that are meeting at least baseline ideas and standards that could be globally adopted. And through that, there's some other initiatives going on through other international organizations to really help put definition around what sustainability might mean and look like in tourism. And eventually all the groups came together and the GSTC was formed in really 2007 and launched in 2008. And I think the impact that we were thinking about then and still now, probably in different ways, of course, but is really to provide that guidance and for businesses and, you know, whether it's small tour operators to large cruise lines and destinations really that of all sizes. And so the criteria itself is very basic and broad to really encapsulate the primary issues that the planet and society is facing today. And I think another idea is to really provide that guidance for travelers and those providers that are trying to choose more sustainably in their travel choices and create this common denominator that media and governments can use to help wrap their heads around when they're planning and managing tourism and destinations, and then help other programs that are trying to get a start have the standards to use as a baseline consideration in looking at what should we be looking at in our destination or in our business. So really to use the criteria freely and openly as a starting place. And I think we see that in both government and non-governmental as well as the private sector. And then we, as a learning institution at the University of Utah, use it to help train the next generation of leaders in the tourism industry. So that's a little bit of background and a little bit of what we hope.
Kelly, thanks very much. Can I just, I mean, there was a big ambition, let's face it, it was going to be hard to achieve that, understandably hard, particularly given the global aspiration. But how do you feel about the progress that's been made? I mean, what sort of percentage of hotels, for example, are now certified?
Well, I think we know that the percentage of hotels is relatively low. I think, that is starting to change. We've actually seen, organizations like TUI, which has certified nearly 400 of its own hotels over the last 6 years. In this last year during COVID, and as we manage through this pandemic, we're seeing a lot of governments really find interest in what this is all about. And so our training courses have increased. And I think the impact is on it's a journey, and it's kind of on a trajectory upwards. We're seeing more, assurance in the marketplace around this idea. We hope to see more uptick of online travel companies, using certified entities as they move forward. So we are seeing movement. It's certainly been slow. It's not as fast as we would have envisioned, but we are seeing impacts that, like the TUI group, for example, I think we use that a lot, that they've seen lower carbon emissions per guest night. They've seen 24% reduction in the volume of water per guest. So they're seeing targets that they're setting, and they're setting greater targets as they move forward. So I think that's helpful.
Kelly, we'll probably come back to this, but I'm not sure that TUI did it because of GSTC. I think they were on that track anyway.
Yeah.
Leanne, can we come to you? You're the sole representative here, really, of Africa, and we are at WTM Africa. So it'd be great to hear from you. First of all, how you see the emergence of GSTC, and then maybe a few reflections on what's happened with Fair Trade Tourism South Africa. What's its experience been?
Yes, and Harold, I think before we even get into the emergence of GSTC, I think we need to go back even historically to when fair trade tourism actually was established, which was ideas first came into fruition around about 1999. I mean, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And early 2000s, the organization was starting to be established. The concepts were being put into place. And myself, as a representative, as a tourism advisor within South Africa, but representing a lot of African countries and doing strategies for a lot of African countries, recognized the value then. We said, this is responsible tourism is the way of the future. And we wanted to be behind fair trade tourism, which had support, had NGO support to actually get it going and get off the ground. And not very much, but I mean, with that little bit of seed money and passion, a lot of passion from committed people, the basic standards were put in place. I mean, we sat around many a boardroom table in our offices, brainstorming, thrashing out what are the requirements that we're looking for, and how we were very much focused on the fair trade concept, and being Africa, that was very important in terms of the social side in particular. So we worked through all of that. And fair trade tourism was launched in terms of being a certification body. And we went through a lot of teething issues around how do you price? How do you actually go and verify or audit the establishments to make sure these are happening? Do we do it in-house? I mean, we had initially, we started off doing it in-house. And then as we grew and as we started to understand more about third-party auditing, and the differentiation between the certification and the auditing and the role that fair trade tourism was actually playing. So we matured, the organization matured. And fair trade tourism was actually part of the sort of planning in terms of trying to get the GSTC together, around the fact that we recognized that there were so many different standards and there were so many different entities that were actually coming in and saying, but we can certify your business, or we can audit your business, or we can, and coming up with different terminologies, and then having each one having a different standard. And it became down to a point where if without a sort of a recognized international standard, there was, and without significant marketing in what you were actually doing, it comes down to the fact that your entity that's certifying can also be greenwashing. Because if they're not auditing properly, if we're not checking, and you're just purely a marketing body, well, then, it's sort of, a bit of a, you're continuing the greenwashing saga, basically, if you want to call it that way. So FTT then went through, or Fair Trade Tourism went through a process. We managed to get quite a big lot of donor funding. And the objective then was to really launch and upscale, really significantly improve not only the quality of the standards that we were working on, but also a massive marketing drive to get product on board, to get businesses on board to be certified. And what we actually discovered through this process is that our standards were too idealistic. So it was actually too difficult for the majority of businesses to actually reach the standards that were in place. So, and they were, I mean, there's this sort of what you want to call it, the cream of businesses that are managing to meet the standards that are there. But there's a whole lot of that are aspiring and working towards, but they don't meet the standards that were in place. And then it became a question of, well, we can't learn, the brand is so important. The importance of the brand and keeping that standard in place is it's really important to us and to those who've achieved it. So it was very difficult. So eventually as an entity, and I think as an entity that does certify, there's 3 roles that I see that the entity has to play. The one is around auditing, which ideally should be outsourced auditing, so third-party auditing, and then certification. Then there is the actual marketing of the brand, and then those products that have been able to successfully achieve the brand. And then the final phase is there's a lot of knowledge around sustainability, about responsible tourism that sits in the organization. And that information needs to be shared. And I can only really speak from an Africa perspective, but tourism businesses, the people who run tourism businesses are not sustainability experts. They're not experts in responsible tourism. And they need a lot of guidance. They need a lot of hand-holding, and they're seeking it because they're wanting to improve. And there has to be that hand-holding process and guidance of actually getting them to reach the standards that have been set. So it's that sort of business support that is required as well. And that sharing of information, being that conduit to share information. So if you think about it, the responsibilities for fair trade tourism in terms of hand-holding, marketing, and then certification are extensive. The costs around it are extensive. But the entities themselves and the types of entities that were seeking to be certified were often community-based entities or smaller entities, lodges, often in more rural areas, out of urban centers. We did have some hotels that were interested and formed part of it, but not many. And it became quite difficult to also get, for example, very big lodge groups involved in fair trade tourism, because they turned around and said, we don't believe we need to be certified. We're doing what we're doing, and we've got our own publications that prove what we're doing, and our own way of actually our own impact assessments and our outputs assessment. But it's not independently audited, but we've got our own way of doing that. So we don't believe we need the brand. So it really is. There's a lot of challenges here. So there's a cost challenge. There's a cost of actually running the entity successfully. There's a cost challenge in that the businesses themselves can't afford to go through the whole auditing process. And in reality, I'm sort of going off track again now, but in reality, from an auditing perspective, when we're auditing or when you're checking an entity, you really want to be measuring ultimately the outcome and the impact and not the output. You want to know what is the impact being of the fact that I have got good labor relations in my organization. You want to know what is the ultimate impact on people's livelihoods. You don't necessarily want to know that we're having 5 meetings a week and people can share their views. You want to know what is that ultimate impact on the livelihoods of people who are working in your environment and in the communities. And measuring something that realistically, Harold, is hugely costly. And so we have to question again in terms of what are we measuring? Why do we need to measure it? And And so when it comes to certification, the value is hugely there because of the greenwashing, because it's so easy to say, I'm doing this, but in the meantime, you're not really, or the impact isn't there. The outcome.
Yeah, it does make it very difficult, Leanne. I understand that. And in a way, FTTSA almost became too expensive to continue to run. I'm hoping we're going to get you back shortly, but in the meantime, Olivia, can we maybe come to you to hear your perception of GSTC?
Yeah, thank you, Harold, and good afternoon, everybody. So I think, you know, what we're seeing, GSTC has been around, as Kelly was saying, for a long time, and started from a really good foundation, being led by the industry, doing a massive piece of work, looking at all the different certification systems that there were. And I think what we're seeing now is GSTC kind of coming of age, actually. And from where we sit, so I work for a consulting firm working mainly with hotels and those who are investing in hotels. There's massive demand for the framework, the structure of GSTC. So people want to know what are the different items they should be looking at, and what are the processes that sit behind being sustainable. And we're seeing, you know, Kelly mentioned the OTAs, TUI, I think Hotel Beds recently announced a new program with GSTC. We're talking to travel management companies. So we're seeing this huge sort of groundswell of interest in sustainability, I suppose. And the fact that GSTC there as a kind of foundation for them all to work from, and most of them are working from it, I think is really, really helpful. Now they're at the stage of identifying what they see to be important, and then how they can A, measure it, and B, communicate that to their customers, who may be individuals or who may be corporates. And that's kind of being thrashed out at the moment. But I think that we're going to see this take off really quite quickly. And there's a lot of work has been done during the pandemic, where things were slightly quieter. But I think we're going to see a big takeoff in GSTC. Now, where you know what that looks like, I'm not quite sure, because I think the traditional approach to certification has some real challenges. Leanne was just talking about that, and I'm sure Andrea will in a minute. And sort of by definition, certification is exclusive, and I think we're at a point now where we need to be inclusive. You know, this isn't just about having the best of the best, and that's really important, that those companies and hotels are recognized. But I think now this is about getting the vast majority of tourism businesses on a path towards sustainability, and understanding what that looks like. And it's complicated, and it varies wherever you are in the world. And it varies on the type of business you are, if you're a large hotel chain or a small community-based organization. So I think we're going to, you know, see over the next year or so a bit of a rethink in the approach around certification. And having GSTC as a basis, I think is absolutely critical.
Thanks very much, Olivia. Leanne, we lost you briefly. Thank you so much for coming back. We heard, I think, pretty much everything you were saying until you realised you'd frozen. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to what you were saying previously, or whether we move on. I don't want you to feel you've been cut off.
Let's move on, and then we can come back later.
We'll pick it up as we come back. Thanks very much, Olivia, and thanks Leanne for coming back. I was pleased to see you return. Andrea, you're obviously in Scotland.
Yes.
What do you think about GSTC?
Okay, right. So bit of background. So green tourism, actually, the concept of green tourism started in 1996. Which was quite a long time ago. We launched in 1997, working very closely with Visit Scotland, and we didn't set out to set up a certification program. You know, with that terminology wasn't something that we knew or understood. What we set out to do was develop a business development program, a way of helping businesses understand their environmental sustainability impact. And that's what we did. And we decided very early on we would make it very accessible, very understandable, very much about hand holding. So it was very much a bottom-up approach. So we set our fees at a cost efficient level. We as an organization have never relied on funding. We are a private company, so we have done consultancy work, but the primary revenue for the company is through our membership fees. And we have very, very small businesses, one man gillies in the Highlands, like we've got behind me here, right up to you know, the likes of Historic Environment Scotland and big hotel chains and big organisations. And we wanted very much that businesses could understand at a very simple way what they could do to improve. And that's what we started out with. And we built on that. And very quickly, in the early days, we had the early adopters, those businesses that were already green-minded, whether they were because they were vegetarian or because they were in the countryside, a lot of small businesses. But it grew from that. And things like the carbon tax, when that was introduced in the UK, that suddenly all the hotels suddenly went, oh my goodness, this is now costing us a lot of money. We've got to do something about that. Foot and mouth had a big impact on us, another crisis that happened. A lot of businesses understanding the relation between tourism and countryside and production of vegetables and things like that. And we grew organically. And what we did is we partnered. Our approach is about collaboration. So we partnered with tourist boards and with destinations. Again, not for funding, but in order to do projects, and we built our capacity. So over the last 23 years, we have undertaken probably about 20,000 assessments. We've actually had in membership at one point or another, probably up to 10,000 businesses. Our current membership is about 2,500, primarily in the UK. And we were very aware of GSTC and we were involved in a pre-projects, things like the Visit project in Europe, which was a collaboration of about 10 eco-labels, because that's what we were called back then. We weren't called certification bodies. And in fact, I'm not even sure I don't call myself a certification body now, because it is all in-house. We don't employ external auditors because of the cost would be astronomical. But we provide a service. And actually what we're doing is we're cross-pollinating ideas. So our assessors speak to businesses, they collect information and they share. So it's about sharing, it's about helping businesses improve. And that's why we've gone for a tiered level. So we have bronze, silver and gold. And we're about rewarding and providing carrots rather than sticks. But it is all about driving change. And GSTC, when it came along, we were aware of it. We didn't think that it was a bad thing. It was good that standards could be raised. I think we definitely, and Harold and I have had this conversation in the past about, can you have global criteria which are meaningful? And I don't think you can. I think you can have an overall a set of standards that people can adjust to, work towards. But obviously, I think you need then to create criteria that's relevant for your destination. And as our destination has primarily been the UK, that's what we've done. However, I think for us, we've never joined the GSTC. We've matched our criteria and we've seen what the criteria is. We think in some ways our criteria exceeds the GSTC. I mean, transport and travel is not something that's particularly focused on within their criteria, and we make a big thing about that. And I think going forward, or past and going forward, it's not something that's been a barrier for us in terms of businesses wanting to join green tourism, nor for destinations or tourist boards or other agencies to work with us. So that's where we are in terms of GSTC. But in terms of certification or sustainable tourism programs, which I think is a nicer terminology, it is about driving change. It's about getting the businesses to understand what they need to do, how it will benefit them. Nobody will join any kind of program unless they can really see what's in it for them. It needs to be accessible and affordable to all types of businesses, and it needs to be flexible. It can't just, I don't believe it should just be just for hotels or just for visitor attractions. It needs to be something that can be adapted for all types, the whole supply chain, which is what we've done in green tourism. We're adaptable for everything. And going forward, we realise, as Olivia said, the marketplace has changed. The amount of business and interest we've had, even through COVID and in post-COVID, is as high as it's been ever. I think COVID has moved sustainability on 5, if not 10 years, or sustainable tourism rather, 5-10 years. And there's a big demand out there, and we want to be more accessible. And so I think technology and embracing those kind of things is the way that we see the future for certification.
Right, one of the things that interests me about the Green Tourism Scheme is that you've had, as you say, about 10,000 businesses go through it. You've currently got about 2,500, which would suggest that people join the scheme, they have the support of your staff, and they achieve what they want to achieve, and they don't stay with you because the value is not there in the certificate, in the logo. Which is quite understandable. So the service they're buying from you is really an advisory service. And I believe some of them come back to you again, don't they? Later?
I was going to say, they don't all leave just because they don't value it. A lot of reasons people leave, you know, the green guru or the green champion leaves, the company changes hands. I mean, I would say in terms of, and obviously we analyze this, in terms of people saying, oh, I don't value it anymore, I think it's probably less than 30%. That's why they move on. But I think you're right, actually, and this is something we've definitely learned, because we came from an environmental sustainability consultancy background. We weren't marketeers, but actually going forward, the marketing side of it is important. And that's something that we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years, spending money on marketing, which we had never done before, hadn't needed to, and didn't feel we needed to, but actually the businesses need that. So social media, providing them with the assets they can use, telling their green stories has become a crucial part of it. And actually, I think now, or within the last few years, it's become crucial because consumers are now listening, because in the past, they weren't. I would say that a vast majority of people who joined green tourism did it because of their personal commitment, because of wanting to reward their staff, or because they were being asked to by their bigger clients that had CSR commitments, or they were German tour operators that said, where's your environmental policy? Or they were a local authority that said, we're not going to give you work unless we can see your credentials on sustainability. And green tourism fitted that mark. But marketing is a crucial part, and having a recognized and credible marketing campaign and mark that people recognize, and that's what we've got in the UK, which we're very lucky to be in that position. It is actually, the consumers are looking for that now, which 5 years ago they weren't.
Andrea, you can use the word luck if you like, but the reality is you worked quite hard to establish.
Yeah, we did work bloody hard. Yeah, we still work bloody hard, but yes, yeah, it's a situation where we were able to, through our collaborative working, to work with a lot of destinations, and we worked in Scotland, then we Visit England, and then we Visit Wales, and then Northern Ireland, Falkland Islands. So and we've done work with New Zealand and Sweden as well, and work in Zimbabwe. So it's you know, that collaborative approach has been the way that we've been successful.
One of the things, thanks, Andrea. One of the things I think distinguishes responsible tourism, or at least I like to think it does, you can correct me, I'm sure, but I think what we understood, and we got it from Krippendorf, to be honest, it wasn't something I dreamt up, but the importance of the meaningful connection for the tourist, and that's become more important as tourism has changed and it's much more focused on the experience. And then when you spoke, I was very taken with a couple of things about what you had to say. One is very obvious, but it's worth repeating, which is that FTTSA, with its fair trade tourism commitment, and it's coming from Southern Africa originally, obviously had a very strong social component that other forms of certification did not have. And that has real meaning for travelers, I think, still. But the other thing you did was you actually talked about the outcomes and the impacts, which you don't often hear people talk about. We see a lot of that in the awards, and that's where the focus is for the Responsible Tourism Awards. But the question always is, how does the business share that?
It's about, you know what, it's about honesty. And it's about, when I say honesty, maybe the better word is actually trust. It's trust between the certification body and the enterprise. And I think, and to me, that is quite a key component of what makes fair trade tourism, if you want to call it, successful over the years, successful with its certified entities. So I just want to say that during COVID, Fair Trade Tourism has basically not lost any of its members. So even though they've had reduced revenues and they've had a really tough times, they really value the brand and they really value the benefits that they get from being part of the brand. And part of that relationship is that trusting relationship, and it's the trust in terms of learning from each other. So there's quite a big family, I would almost call it a family network, where the clients share information and they want to share, they love to learn from each other and learn and advance and keep on improving. So they're also pretty open about what they're doing. So because you need to be able to get into your auditors, whether you're doing it in-house, whether you're doing it externally, needs to be able to really get to the nub of the business, and also from a social perspective, really get into the communities and the people that are working in the environment, and away from management, away from input from management, and really sort of finding out the benefits and the impact it's having on their lives. What's really happening in terms of, the fact that I was talking about earlier, we might have staff meetings, but what is the real benefit to you, employee, as a result of these staff meetings? And how does this benefit your life? And maybe the social programs that the lodge, say, for example, is putting in place, how does that benefit the community? And we actually go in, from an auditing perspective, we actually go in and actually witness and see all of this. But the question comes back, Harold, in terms of these are often not big entities, and these people that run these businesses, I'm talking about entities, these businesses are doing it. They're doing all their interventions because they're passionate. They're passionate about people. They're passionate about the benefits tourism can bring to the communities, and they want to see real benefits taking place. But I was talking about the whole cost around all of this. So to measure the impact, as I mentioned, is costly. And to get a real proper understanding, or at least the outcome, if you might not get to the impact, but you might get to the outcome, it's very costly. And the question then rises, would those entities not be better suited reinvesting that, instead of paying for an audit, reinvesting it in what they're doing? Because it probably goes, what they're doing is really a great job, and it goes quite a long way by reinvesting it back into the community.
Leanne, I'm going to just push you, because you work for BDO, and one of the things which I understand, I don't know BDO well, but one of the things I understand you do is you do the accountancy services for a lot of hospitality businesses. And one of the things that intrigues me, just before I forget, let me confirm for everybody that I think FTTSA is a family. I mean, every time I hear somebody talk about it and talk about other people, they talk about it as though it's a family. I think that's absolutely fair comment, Leanne. I think FTTSA has achieved that very well, and it means there's pressure from within the family. If anybody becomes a bit errant or isn't trying hard enough, the family pressures them to do more, and I think that's a really quite useful dimension to what's happened there. But what I wanted to push you on is that some of the areas, for example, if you're running a hotel shop and you're selling craft, it's quite possible, surely, for the accountancy firm that does your books to confirm how much you're purchasing from genuinely local businesses. Surely it just becomes another line in the accounts, doesn't it? And if we mainstreamed it in that way, would it be easier to collect that information? Can't collect everything that way, I understand that, but surely that would be possible. It just becomes another line in the accounting.
Absolutely. Harold, I agree with you. And you know what, I still feel that if you want to call it, I'm not talking about BDO, but I'm talking about the world, the
Sure.
ESG standards. I really think that we as businesses are really just touching on it now. I mean, it's exactly the same as we're talking about responsible tourism, sustainable tourism. We've been talking about it for 20 odd years, and the pace of change has been pretty glacial. In the business environment as well, ESG has been very glacial. Change has been very glacial in businesses in general. And obviously there's a few committed organizations, but for the majority, it's a tick box. It's still a tick box exercise. And it does come back down to your accounting systems and your reporting systems in terms of how you're actually doing this, instead of trying to rush around at the end of the year. Oh gosh, we've got to collect some data. The ESG auditors are on their way. I mean, you would think that we would be thinking about it and planning it up front, and rather doing this more holistically and as committed as organizations as a whole.
Sorry, go on, Leah.
I really feel that there is we have a failing, and I can only speak from an Africa perspective, in that there's a failing between policy, SDG policies, and actual implementation, and that sort of commitment somewhere in between. But at policy level and then at implementation level, there's a disjoint. And I sort of bring this back almost to responsible tourism, is that we see in Africa, we see policies around responsible tourism. We try and see in different levels of commitment from different governments in terms of responsible tourism. But the real, actually, when it comes to implementation, it's missing. There's a big gap. So the willingness is there, or the interest is there at a policy level and a sort of government level, but in really making it happen, it's not happening, in my view. It's not happening fast enough, and it's not happening. I can speak from the point of view that we do tourism strategies for municipalities, for regions, for provinces, for countries, and there's sort of there's a lot of lack of understanding in terms of what is responsible tourism at a policy level. So there's a couple of people that are really interested, but there's a general lack of understanding. And then how do we actually integrate this into tourism development in our area, and how do we actually make it happen? And it's not happening. It's not happening yet. And I really see that this is a big issue. And so whether this applies to responsible tourism or whether this applies to business in general, there's this gap that somehow we need to overcome.
If I'm honest, Leanne, I wish it was just an Africa problem. I don't think it is. I think it's a pretty general problem. And even the places which have made big steps forward, I think of Barcelona, for example, which has done some remarkable things, it's still not able to report on what the impact is. Interestingly, in Kerala they can, but they have a very different government structure there. But I think you're absolutely right, and it's partly that makes it meaningful. I mean, Kelly, just to come back, no, actually, Olivia, maybe come to you first on this. I was in Cape Town for WTM at the height of the drought. A lot of people were phoning me up and saying, should we even be going to Cape Town with the drought on? And I was saying, well, I think we should. You know, the money that we spend while we're there is really important to the local economy. We should be going. And then they were saying, well, where should we stay? And what they meant was, how can we stay in a hotel that's got a very good track record in terms of the amount of water it's consuming per bed night? And guess what? You can't find out. And then on top of that, you get people saying, we've got these wonderful water facilities in the hotel. Better be careful now. And I say, well, it'd be fantastic. I'd love to see that. And guess what? I never did get to see it. There's a real problem. And Kelly, I'm sorry for doing this again, but I do it every time you and I talk. You know, I go to Morocco, I put in a hotel. It's apparently a gold standard sustainable hotel. I go in the room, the temperature's at 15 degrees. I turn it up because it's going to make me ill. I go out to eat. I come back and the room attendants come in, and lo and behold, it's back at 15 degrees. And I end up ill on that particular occasion. Now, the problem is, Kelly, and you and I have talked about this before, every time that happens, it undermines people's faith in the certification system. And that's not your fault, Kelly, and it's not your fault, Olivia, but it's a problem. And it's the question is, what do we do about it? Because there's a failure to perform sometimes, and there's nearly always a failure to report in sufficient detail to make it meaningful for the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the base of all of this is the tracking and the measurement, isn't it? And what systems have you got in place to do that? And then once you're doing that, it's about transparently reporting, you know, what is the water consumption per room night, or however you measure it. I think that there is a big education piece to be done. There are ingrained beliefs within hospitality that air conditioning should be at a certain level, you know, that kind of thing, which is, you know, no longer really holds true. And there's all kinds of technologies that can help that. You know, it shouldn't be, frankly, a housekeeping person, you know, setting the temperature. It should be done automatically. It should be sensitive. It should know when you open the balcony door to get more heat in, that's what you want, so it doesn't ramp up the air conditioning. You know, there's all kinds of solutions to that kind of thing. So I think there's an education piece.
So Olivia, given that your
well.
company often works with new build, can I be optimistic that things are going to be better with the new hotels which are being built?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we necessarily work specifically with new builds. We work mainly with hotel chains that have a big mixture of existing and new properties. So, but I think there is definitely investment in this area. There is, you know, going back to the tracking, you know, if you can monitor your energy use, for example, you can see when it's spiking. You can see when you're, you know, spending, and it comes down to cost, doesn't it? When you're spending more than you have to. So there's a big drive towards that. I think there's enormous complexities around the hotel sector in terms of the owner, investor, brand relationships, and the whole system that's the process that sits behind a new build, which means there's so many different actors that you know, if they're not all aligned around sustainability, then at some point you're going to drop the ball, and you know, any good intentions may go out the window because a bank manager comes along or wants to reduce the cost or something. So it's a really complicated process, but you know, the technologies are there. We publish our biannual Green Lodging Trends report. We see progress all the time in terms of how hotels are dealing with this. And at the end of the day, it kind of makes business sense. It's challenging when you've got old buildings and you're managing large portfolios. But I think we're definitely seeing movement. And, you know, one of the reasons we're seeing movement is because the investor community is asking for it. And, you know, I take Leanne's point about ESG still being a bit of a tick box exercise. It is in many places, but, you know, those investors are wanting to see risk analysis. They're wanting to see progress. They're wanting to see efficiencies, and they're wanting to see good community relations and good employee relations. So the S of ESG is becoming more and more important by the day, and that is going to filter through eventually. So I think, you know, that there's a lot of work to be done, but we're seeing it, you know, speed up considerably. And with the added pressures of climate change, conversations around net zero and science-based targets and that kind of thing, I think, you know, we will see considerable process. Now, whether it's quick enough is another conversation, but it's definitely moving in the right direction.
I think there are probably some elements around the people who actually build hotels as opposed to the people who operate them, Leanne, which is perhaps worth just briefly mentioning before we come back to the audit process. But it seems to me one of the difficulties is that the big chains, not so true actually in Africa, but globally, the big franchise hotel chains that we all know actually own relatively few of the hotels they operate, and they're often built by a local investor before they're taken over by the hotel chain. So often it is very difficult. I remember actually in Santon asking why the lights were on outside on a really hot sunny day. Got the hotel manager and he explained that all the lighting on that floor was on one circuit and you couldn't switch the lights off outside independently of what was happening with the lights inside. And you think, what is it like to run a hotel which has been so badly built in the first place, but it wasn't built by the hotel company now trying to run it? I think that is part of the problem in our sector, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have I got that right, Leanne, or do you think I'm adrift there?
No, it's right. I mean, it actually applies to Africa too, that the brands are generally asset light. They don't own very many of their hotels. I'm talking about generally the international brands. The South African brands tend to be a little bit different, but the majority of the international brands don't own. They're just managing on behalf of that. Yeah.
Which makes delivering then on sustainability more difficult than it might otherwise be. But can I come back to this whole question of third-party auditing? Because I think that's really one of the big weaknesses. I know that everybody thinks third-party auditing is better because it's going to be more honest. I am not so convinced. Andrea, you've never gone the third-party audit route, have you? You directly employ all of the people who do your audit.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, we never set out to set ourselves up as a certification body. We always set itself up as a business development advisory, whatever. So our assessors are all employed, so therefore we don't lose any of the knowledge that those assessors gain when they're doing their assessments. We use external agencies to verify, advise, influence our criteria and our standards. So it's not just an internal exercise in terms of we decide what the score is and that's what people get. It is policed in some ways, but the main thing really is about driving change. And to pick up on the comment about how do you get businesses to monitor and measure, over 50% of our criteria relate in some way or another to the guest and what the guest can see, experience, and rationalize. And our certification program, oh, sorry, use that word now. Our assessment program process is they get credit if they're telling their guests. So therefore, by telling their guests, they're opening up themselves up to the guests saying, oh, well, you say you've got such and such on your menu and I can't see it. So actually, they're using their guests as their assessment process, and everyone's very much about trade descriptions, acts and things like this. They would not put stuff out there if the guests could actually pick up on it, because there'll be some guests somewhere who will. Now, obviously, you can't talk about what they're doing back of house, but when it comes to all of the customer facing things, that's within our criteria, and they only get the highest credit if they are actually telling their guests and sharing what they're doing.
Kelly, can I come back to you? You've very kindly sat and listened for a while. I mean, clearly at the heart of the GSTC process is this concept of third-party auditing for certification. And I often think again about the Morocco example, that had I gone to the front desk and complained and demanded some compensation for the fact that they were trying to make me ill, and I said, you know, there's a massive gap between what you claim in terms of being a green hotel and what you deliver, they'd have said, well, we didn't actually claim to be a green hotel. The certification agency did that. There's no recompense for me as the consumer in that scenario. And I think for me, that's quite a big structural challenge for a certification agency, because you're not going to accept that I can go, and nor would I expect you to. No certification agency is going to accept that I can come and take action against you, quite rightly. But the problem is potentially it lets the hotel off the hook, as opposed to where they make claims themselves, in which case you have got some possibility of getting recompense and commenting unfavorably on social media. Is that a debate that's gone on within GSTC, or is it just assumed that third party is always better?
I think there's ongoing discussions with our certification bodies that are working towards accreditation, and some of the challenges along with that, and especially when it comes to ISO and some of the other you know, really requirements that are placed there. I don't know that I think the jury's still out on the third party audit. We don't have that conversation per se. But Harold, in thinking about your case, you know, most of the certifications and the processes that are engaged in that certification process really ask the entity or destination to engage its stakeholders, be it employees or the community broadly. And to hear that of what happened to you, it seems like there's a disconnect there, that something's missing in the implementation of that certification program and that management of specifically that hotel, because ideally everybody in the hotel would know about the certification, know what's important, know the value of why they do it, and be able to accommodate a guest complaint. And so that seems off to me. I don't know that that's I don't know how common that is, honestly, but I think it's an interesting conundrum faced by those implementing certification for ticking off the box versus those in Andrea and Leanne and honestly Olivia's case, where they're actually looking at what the true value is to make positive change on the ground. And so
I'll tell you what is interesting, Andrea, Kelly, because I don't know how common it is either, and I always use the same example. But it's interesting how often you go into the hotel room and there's one of those card machines that's supposed to turn on or off the lighting and so on, and somebody's carefully stuck a piece of cardboard in there, so it's been overridden. Or alternatively, what happens a lot to me is that I check in as a single man. I get given 2 pieces of plastic card, and I say, I don't, you know, I'm not having a woman in the room with me. I don't need 2. And they say, no, you still need 2. And, you know, you realize that actually this is happening a lot of the time. And it undermines the faith in a system, which seems to me we need to make work, because otherwise we're just greenwashing still. And that worries me, but I'm beginning to be a bit too negative now.
Well, I think the good thing we have since we started this, you know, discussion back in 2000 and many discussions prior to that, I'm sure, is we have kind of this call out culture, right? And people are becoming more aware. So I think the more education that happens, both on the consumer side and the entity and enterprise side, the better off we're going to be, because people aren't, you know, they're calling that out. And I would have thought that Harold Goodwin would have posted, you know, something on TripAdvisor, and it's becoming instantaneous. So it's not, I've got to write a letter and it's going to get posted 2 weeks later. It's now. And I think that's holding all of us to a higher level of discussion and education and interest in going, where are the gaps? You know, there was gaps discussed, and I think those gaps are real. And where are the gaps, and how do we fix it? You know, how do we continuously improve what we're purporting that could work as aspirational maybe, but have shown some progress in many ways. And that discussion and opening that discussion, saying, hey, if you do one thing wrong, you're not all bad, but let's fix that thing. You know, instead of saying, well, I'm not going there, they don't have the right shower heads. Let's educate that enterprise and say, but they're doing a lot for the community, so let's not throw them under the bus yet. Let's bring them into the fold. And I think part of the issue is we brought people under the bus too much for not doing everything, right?
Kelly, just to be clear, the reason I didn't go to the front desk and complain is I could just see that all I was going to do was get the room attendant into trouble, and I wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it doesn't matter what my experience is. You know, I'm just one person. I'm grumpy anyway, so it really doesn't make any difference. But I worry much more about the generality of the impact of that. On the other hand, it's a long time since I saw one of those wretched A cards about please don't ask us to wash your towels every day in a hotel bedroom with a shower that nobody had tried to reduce the water flow on, which used to be a very common experience, and that is no longer a common experience. So, you know, some progress is being made. I don't want to pretend that no progress is being made, but I think the critical thing, and we're going into the last 8 or 9 minutes now, so I want to go around each of you, but the critical thing now is how do we speed up progress? And what I'd like to finish with is asking each of you just to say, what are the things you think would make a significant difference over the next 10 years? We all know that the next decade is really critical to the whole sustainability issue for all of us. So Andrea, can I start with you this time, and I'll go, as it were, backwards around the way we went the last time. So Andrea, what would be your 2 key things to change that you think would make a difference?
I think massively increased use of technology to do the reporting, to do the process, to do the advice. I think that's something we've all discovered and learned through COVID anyway. But I think more and more it's listening to the customers and getting the customers engaged and using their demands and interests to inspire and encourage and influence businesses to do more.
Olivia.
I think, first of all, I would say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because I think we need to engage as many companies, entities, consumers as possible in this drive towards more sustainability. And then I think we need to stop obsessing about a kind of global approach to this. I think GSTC as an underlying framework is absolutely vital, but it does not have to be applied uniformly globally. And I think that what we're going to see, and if you play this back to the consumer piece, is we need to stop talking about overall sustainability and we need to start looking at different elements. We need to start saying, is this carbon zero? Has this property eliminated all their single-use plastics? Have they reduced their waste to landfill? Are they proving their benefit to the local community? Are they treating their employees properly? And look at it like that, and stop trying to pull it all together under one umbrella, because the message gets lost, it's confusing, and then the engagement goes.
I was genuinely, thank you, Olivia. I was genuinely quite shocked that I couldn't even go into Cape Town in the middle of a drought, get that information from local government. And it seems to me we need to be ready for that. You know, it'll be something else next time, be different things in different places. But people want to have the ability to choose. Leanne.
Okay, so from my perspective, my two key points. The first one for me, to speed everything up, is that we need a proper tripartite commitment from government, private sector, and NGOs. So to me, we need to have all three working together and committed to making change when it comes to responsible tourism. So we've got to really talk about implementing policy, and how do we do it? And government's got to work through that in implementing policy, not just setting the policy. So that to me is number one. And then similar to what the other two speakers are saying, I'm saying we also need flexibility. And I had also made notes about the fact that we need to have some flexibility and applauding baby steps. So let's acknowledge where even if it is just in one small area, but if you're making baby steps and you're moving forward, let's applaud that and let's recognize it. And I really do believe we should have that separate focus as well on between environment, social, cultural, and even broken down even more within that, so we can make it easier. And I've always purported the fact that we need to have it consumer-led as well. So it must be something that, how does the consumer, when it comes to evaluating an establishment, how does the consumer perceive what's going on here? And that to me is quite key. And maybe we are over-engineering what needs to be done. Maybe we need to almost go back to the drawing board and let's back to our baby steps in terms of from a consumer perspective as well.
I think I agree with all of that, Leanne, and I think one of the real strengths of the FTTSA brand was in the name. You know, that focus on the social really captured people's imaginations, and people understood what it meant. I do think that is really important. And Kelly, to come to you for the last word. I mean, you're in a university, and clearly more and more children. I mean, I think when I was at school, which was a long time ago, I don't think the word ecology it certainly didn't penetrate the school curriculum, and certainly the concerns about climate change and water didn't penetrate. Now it's there in the school curriculum, it's there in the universities. We're going to have a much more educated consumer base, aren't we, moving forwards? And that, I think, is grounds for optimism. But what would be your 2 or 3 key changes that you'd like to see, Kelly?
I don't like having the last word. I think everything that everyone said has been absolutely spot on. We do see a connection between higher consumer ratings and certified entities. So when you compare non-certified to certified, we have some research has shown that. So there's some research going on that is valuable. I think we need to take that outcome approach. I think we need to look and somehow connect. We're trying to, with the GSTC, connect the wicked problems of our time through the lens of the SDGs and connect them to why these things are important. And I think that brings it to a level that's digestible and understandable by the consumer. But also, my second thing would be, let's educate policymakers. Let's continue to get in their space so that they're making educated decisions about planning and support and all the things that they are responsible for as a body that really cares for a community broadly, you know, a state, a region, a town, whatever it might be. But I think there's a big gap in education in our policymakers. But our policymakers are also consumers, and they're also students of ours at the university eventually, right? So it starts from very young age all the way up through. And one thing we're doing at the university is trying to tackle some of these problems with a more interdisciplinary approach. And I believe Andrea mentioned bring in NGOs and, you know, or sorry, Leanne did NGOs and policymakers and the private sector together. But I do think that creating more interdisciplinary forums so the engineers can hear this stuff and work on technology that's more affordable and accessible. And the planners, the people that plan communities, the people that design hotels, we're getting the larger community on board. So that's where I think we need to go. And I see it happening in pockets. I'm hopeful forever, but there's a lot of work to be done, no doubt.
Kelly, thank you very much. I think we've explored a lot of these issues now in 2 panel debates about certification. We will take it through to London in November, Kelly, and we need to think how we can use that platform to encourage the ideas which have come out now of both of the panels that we've held. Can I thank you all for what I've certainly enjoyed, and I think is an enlightening opportunity to think through some of these issues, and in a very good-humoured and collegiate way, perhaps to look towards some change going forward. Thank you very much indeed.